Hello, it's Chari Moss here today for EllenHutson.com. I'm going to be making a card using a new United We Flourish set from My Favorite Things called Good Friends. This is the set, and I just have to use that cute little wiener dog on the bottom there to make my card today. I'm also going to be using the Folk Hearts dies from Essentials by Ellen. And that new Good Friends set has dies that we're going to use as well. I'm going to start by making my card base, and I just have a piece of 80-pound Neenah Solar White cardstock here that I've cut at 4 1/4 wide, long ways, and I'm just going to score that at 5 1/2 inches to create a top folding portrait oriented card. We're going to be doing a little bit of masking and ink dusting today on our card. I'm going to be using this piece of already partly used typing paper actually to do my masking, but you could also use masking paper. I just did not have mine handy at the time. So I'm just cutting this down to a square so that I can cut my mask out of it here. And I'm going to be using the second largest heart in this die set because I'm going to put it on my card. I'm going to cut the heart out, and that is going to be my mask, and then I'm going to blend the ink around the outside of it, and I kind of want it down to the bottom corner of my card, and I don't want to take up the whole card, but I do want it large enough to sort of fill the card. So that is why I picked the size that I picked, and I'm just going to hold this down with some post-it note tape and cut it out of this typing paper. So I'm going to put that part aside. I actually use that to make another card later, but you could use that mask as well for another project, and I'm just going to use the piece that I cut out. So to adhere it down, I'm actually going to use some repositionable tape runner. And like I said, if you have masking paper, you wouldn't have to do this part because it's already going to have the adhesive on the back. So I'm just going to make sure that my repositionable adhesive, which this is not as tacky as stuff that you would want to permanently leave down. I'm just going to go around the outside edge so that it's held down pretty well. I'm not going to be doing any hard ink blending like with the foam, so this should do just fine for the project that I'm going to do and the technique I'm going to use. So I'm going to put that heart right down on my card base, right where I want it. So that part will stay white. And I've got some tumbled glass distress ink here and a clarity stencil brush. And what I'm doing is I'm just putting that ink on very lightly. It's going to take a lot of layering here. So I'm starting on the mask so that I don't get any blobs of ink, and then pulling the ink off. So it's going to make a nice line around that heart, and you're going to see that nice shape when we pull it up. There's a lot more ink on the mask than there's going to be on the card base. You can also tap it off on that extra piece of scrap paper there if you need to. And this is going to be a very subtle heart. So you can see now that I pull it up. And if you wanted more color, you just keep dusting the ink on there with the brush. So now for my little dog, I've got a little piece of Neenah Desert Storm cardstock here, and I'm just going to emboss him. So I'm using some black VersaFine ink, and I'm also going to use some clear embossing powder. This is my favorite way to black emboss. Instead of using black embossing powder, is to use the VersaFine ink and clear embossing powder. You get a really nice crisp image. And I'm just going to heat that up with my heat tool and make sure that's all melted and embossed. Now to add, I'm going to cut apart the dies first, and we're going to cut him out. And I'll just hold that in place with some post-it note tape again and run it through my Cuttlebug machine. So now to add a little bit more interest to this dog, I am taking my Copic chart I've got here and just picking out a brown that is similar in color but yet darker. And I'm just going to color his ear in so it stands out a little bit. Then I'm also going to add a couple little dots of color on his back. This is a really good way to make solid color images without having to color them in. Use your colored paper. And I just use a colored pencil since we have craft cardstock here to add a little rosy cheek. Now to work on my sentiment. I'm going to use the one that says sending smooches because I think that's super cute. And I'm going to do some white embossing on colored cardstock. So I've got a little piece of chili pepper lawn fawn cardstock here, but use whatever red cardstock you have. And I just used my powder tool to get rid of the static. And I'm going to be using the Versamark ink, which is a clear sticky ink, which is great for embossing. And I'm putting this sentiment right down on the bottom edge of this. This piece of cardstock actually is already cut at the 4 1/4 wide. And I'm using some Lawn Fawn white embossing powder. I really like this new embossing powder. I think it really fills in the gaps that you get with embossing powder sometimes and makes a nice thick sentiment or image. And I'm just going to heat that up with my heat tool as well. Once I've got it all melted, I'm actually just going to trim a piece off of the bottom. I had a couple stray little pieces of embossing powder and I'm just scratching those off with my craft knife there. So now I'm going to trim that down just to a little strip. And that's going to go along the bottom of the card. I actually used a sand eraser to clean up those stray bits of embossing powder. It worked pretty well too. I had not tried this method before. So here's sort of how we're going to lay this out at the bottom. And then I wanted to add a little bit more interest to my sentiment strip here. So I've got some of the Lawn Fawn Let's Polka in the Meadow papers. This is an older paper pack, but I got this out because I wanted to use that black and white stripe. So I wanted that black and white really contrasting. You can probably find this pattern in lots of other paper packs too. But I wanted to keep the colors kind of simple and not introduce another color, so that's why I'm picking out this black and white. I'm going to cut this to be a little bit wider than that sentiment strip I have down there so that when I layer it behind, it's going to peek out behind the bottom of it. So I'll just add some adhesive runner to the back of the red piece of cardstock. And then I'm just going to layer that on top of the striped paper and line it up with the very top so that that pattern peeks out from underneath. And then I'll just take my scissors and trim off that excess paper that I really don't need. So now I can adhere this to my card base, and I'm just going to add some adhesive again. And I'm going to adhere that flat to my card base, overlapping the bottom of the heart. I'm going to let the bottom of that inked masked heart peek out from underneath it. My little dog's going to overlap my sentiment strip there, but I'm going to pop him up on some scrapbook adhesives pop-up foam squares. These are the regular thickness ones. I really like the thin ones as well, but since he's the only thing that I'm popping up on this card, I decided to use the regular thickness. So I'm just going to overlap his feet on that sentiment strip so that he's kind of standing on it to the side. And then I'm taking the little heart stamp that's also included in the stamp set, and I'm just going to add a couple red hearts around. I'm using some Distress Oxide ink. I thought that would stand out very nicely, especially where I overlap the places I've already blended with the tumbled glass ink. And then finally, to finish it off, I picked out these Pretty Pink Posh clear star-shaped sequins here. They're really small, but I thought it would add a little bit of shine and not add too much more color and still keep my color scheme really simple with the blue and the red and the black and white with the little brown dog. So I've just got 5 here, and I've placed them where I want them, and I'm going to use some of my Ranger Multi-Medium in Matte finish. It has a precision tip on it, and I'm also using a Marvy jewel picker to pick up those little sequins and put them back down. And then I'm just going to make sure they're all flat with my tweezers here. And that is all there is to this card. It is all finished, nice and simple. I tried to channel my inner Julie Ebersol today, so hopefully I did that. Thanks for watching. Bye.